right. Well, on Tuesday, we did our build a shelter exercise, and we processed that. And so today, we're actually going to get into the coursework and start learning in-depth stuff about psychology. Psychology is the study of behavior and human processing. Mental processing. The study of behavior and mental processing. Now, as we go along, there's going to be things that I tell you that are very, very important that you might want to star it, underline it, highlight it, write important beside it, and circle it. Well, this isn't quite that important, but this is very important. I want you to look at this for a second. It says the study of behavior and mental processes. It does not say that it is the study of human behavior and human mental processes. So it is not just limited to people. Psychologists will study dogs and frogs and cats and bats and bugs and slugs and snakes, and basically if it moves, if it has a nervous system, we're going to be interested in it. So be aware, it is not just humans that we study. Now, the psychology, it studies behavior and mental processes. Well, behavior is outward actions, overt actions, actions that you can see, actions that you can measure. Mental processes, that's internal, covert activity in the mind. Now, psychology is a science. It's debatable whether it's a hard science or not. You talk to your physicists and your chemists, and they'll say, no, it is not a science, especially it's not a hard science. But, that's debate, and we're not going to solve it here. I don't know why it's not considered a hard science, because the physicists, and chemists, they use math. We use math. They use a laboratory. We do experiments in laboratories. They use careful and precise measurements. We use careful and precise measurements. They, I don't know what differentiates them as being a hard science. One of the things, though, that all sciences try and do is to prevent bias from getting in the way of their research. Right now, I'm working on my proposal for my dissertation. If it's approved by the committee, then it officially becomes I'm working on my dissertation. For the last 4 or 5 months, my chairperson has been hammering on me. She'll go and look at these 2 or 3 paragraphs, and she'll say, you got to attend to this kind of a bias. There's a bias in here, and you've got to work on that and reword this or account for it or neutralize it. And we work and bend over backwards to try and make everything unbiased, okay? There are 4 goals in psychology. We want to describe. We want to describe what's happening. We want to explain why is it happening. We want to, yes?
Is this in the book, or do we need to write that?
Well, actually, you will have, you have access to these PowerPoint on the Blackboard already, and I'm going to post this lecture on the Blackboard, hopefully, well, I know sometime this weekend, but hopefully between now and tomorrow. Okay, so we want to describe what's happening to explain why is it happening. brings into theories. Okay, now theory, it's a simplified statement. It's a general explanation of a set of things that can be observed, or a general explanation of facts, okay? We want to predict, will it happen again? Can we make it happen? And we want to be able to control it. How can it be changed? You know? That would be where can we make it happen. So you've got describing, what's happening, explanation, why is it happening, prediction, will it happen again, controlling. Can we make it happen, or can it be changed? There are the roots of psychology. Now, how many of y'all have viewed the movie yet on the history of psychology? It is posted on your, oh good, thank you. It is posted on your blackboard, and it's actually listed as history. And all you do is just click on that, and it'll bring the movie right up. It talks about the history from basically the beginning until today on psychology and the treatment of the mentally ill. I'm running that instead of doing the lecture on history, because this has got a lot more stuff than your book, and it's presented in a very interesting way. But we talk about the history of psychology, and within the root of the history of the psychology are the roots of modern psychology, and that would be structuralism and functionalism, psychoanalysis and behavioralism. Okay? Many people think that if you go into psychology, there is only basically 3 areas that you can actually work in and be a psychologist. They either think that you have to be a teacher, or sit down and listen to somebody talk about somebody's problems for 8 hours a day, or go into research. Well, I've got a book, I think it's in my office right now, that's about that thick, and it has that many subfields of psychology, that many opportunities to find a niche in this field that would be of interest to you. Well, I'm going to go over a couple or several subfields, and I'm going to show you that it's just not limited to research and teaching and counseling, but there's many more subfields, and some of them can be quite lucrative. The first one we're going to talk about is called biological psychology. It's also called physiological psychology, and many people refer to it as the medical model or the disease model. Now, the biological subfield is going to deal with heredity. It's going to try and find an explanation for how you think or how you behave that the explanation is rooted in an organic cause. It is going to study how the brain affects the body and how the body affects the brain. Now, I can think of a way very quickly how the body can affect the brain. Diabetes. If your blood sugar gets really, really squirrely, it can result in a person being very confused, very disoriented. That's the body affecting the brain. A thyroid, a person who has a bad thyroid, it can cause depression. It can cause confusion. So that's the body affecting the brain affecting the body. Well, a simple thing would be something like, okay, if you worry, you're going to have blood pressure problems, might have an ulcer. But a better example is one that comes about, it occurred, I think, about 1968. On an August morning in 1968, gentleman named Charles Whitman got up, put some personal belongings in his car, and he was in Austin, Texas, and he drove to the University of Texas. Now, the University of Texas has a special building, I think they call it the Clock Tower Building, and it is made where you've got the building like right here, and if I'm not mistaken, it's in this is all clearing, and then you've got buildings and parking lots and shrubbery and whatever surrounding it. Okay? Well, on that August morning, Charles Whitman got up, put his personal belongings in his car, drove over to the University of Texas, went to the tower, took his personal belongings and went to the it was the oversight, it's a viewing area where you can go out on this kind of like a balcony and you can see all over the campus. Particularly clearing. Well, the personal belongings that he brought was an arsenal. And he brought rifles and he brought ammunition. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a Marine sniper, a trained Marine sniper. And he started shooting at the people at Texas, at the school UT. And he hit, I know that he hit some students, and he got a couple of other people, visitors or faculty or whatever. And it took some time for the police to be able to get to the tower because of that clearing. Anybody who would run in there was right in his view, and they couldn't get to the tower. Well, finally, a couple of cops were able to get there, and they went up, went up the stairs, and I think that I've heard they had to crawl over a body. They got to the very top of the tower, and they were about ready to enter, and the door was barricaded, so they had to break the door down. When they did, a gun battle ensued, and they ended up killing Mr. Whitman. Now, why am I telling you this? After Mr. Whitman was killed, they took his body to a coroner, and they did an autopsy. There was a gigantic tumor, a very large tumor in his frontal lobes of his brain. A biological psychologist would want to know, did that tumor have anything to do with him going to that college and shooting those people? Did it have any responsibility? Did it have any influence? That's the kind of stuff that a biological psychologist wants to know. How does something that's going on in the brain affect our thinking, affect our behavior? They're interested in electrochemical reactions. They're interested in heredity. Well, then we have developmental psychology. Study of changes from birth to death, from womb to tomb. Well, just being absolutely honest, that is not my favorite branch of psychology. Honestly, I taught it one time and I sucked so bad at it, I was embarrassed. And I don't like to do something if I can't do a decent job. You study the changes from womb to tomb. Well, these people have interviewed thousands of people to try and identify certain milestones, certain behaviors, certain changes in a physiological or mental changes in a person at different points in their life. Different life stages. Now, anybody in here have a kid? How old?
10.
10? Oh, boy. We don't have any babies in here, do we?
I got a 3-year-old.
A 3-year-old. Okay, well good, because that's still in touch with what's going on. When your baby was born, I would wager that the pediatrician, as you would take that baby for its checkups, would say something like, well, is the baby watching moving objects? Is the baby starting to push itself up on its own? Is he lifting his head up on his own? Is he starting to roll over on his own? Little things like that. Yeah, those are developmental milestones. If a baby at 2 years old wasn't walking, that doctor would want to know what's going on. That would be a developmentally delayed child. And the doctor is going to be really, really poking around and finding out why. On the other hand, if that baby was 6 months old and walking completely by itself without any support, that's a developmentally accelerated child. And, you know, the doctor's probably going to be watching him pretty close too to see what's going on. An example of how this can really benefit us, though, I had a lady come in one day, one of my patients, and she sat down and she said, I'm just so blue. And I said, well, what's going on? She goes, I don't know. I don't know. She goes, all I've been thinking about is my life, and I've been thinking about friends that have passed. I've been thinking about, have I made a difference? What have I contributed anything to the world? Has my life had any significance? And she said, I've thought a lot about my, you know, how much of my life is already gone. And I said, wow. I said, how long has this been going on? She said, oh, 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, has there been anything significant that has happened? Is there anything that's gone on that has made you feel this way? She goes, no. And I said, there hasn't been any event whatsoever, nothing out of the ordinary. And she goes, well, I had my birthday. I said, if you don't mind my asking, how old were you on your birthday? And she said, oh, 60. I went to the computer and I typed out Erik Erikson's developmental model. Brought it up, went down to the very bottom, and I said, would you read that for me, please? And she said, at this stage in life, the person is starting to question their significance. They're looking at their mortality. They are looking at past friends and thinking and reflecting a lot on the past. And she said, this is me. And I said, absolutely. I said, we have an actual clinical word, and I do have a diagnosis for you on what you've been going through the last couple of weeks. And she said, what's that? I said, normal. Absolutely normal. And I would not have known that had it not been for developmental psychologists who have studied so many people and know that this is a commonality that occurs at that point in life. And so there are certain things that occur in your 30s. There's certain things that occur, you know, when you're a child. And they have these mapped out, and you look for those, and you're aware of things that people are going to be going through. Cognitive psychology, well, these people concentrate on how a person thinks. They want to know the how and why. What are the underlying thought processes behind this? How did that person make a judgment? How did they come to this conclusion? How were they able to memorize this? They want to know the hows, the whys, the underlying thought processes. Then you've got your personality psychologist. And they take a group and they want to know how everybody's different. Well, that's pretty easy. But they also want to know how they're similar. And that gets sticky. You know, I could probably come up with one thing that is common with all of y'all. For some reason, education has become important to you. different reasons, but it is important to you. You know, whether you want a better job or whether you just not knowing what to do and so you're killing time, but thing is, it is important to you right now in your life. And so you have that in common with every one of your classmates right now. Well, I told you I was not going to read line by line and verse by verse, so I'll let you read this slide when you're going through your chapter. Social psychology, well, this is kind of linked to sociology. They're going to study ways that people think about themselves. They want to know ways that people think about others and how people influence each other. One of my favorite forms of psychology, and I think that it would be fun to go into consumer psychology. Consumer psychology studies why do people buy things? How could we motivate somebody to buy something that they don't even know exists right now? And one of the ways is very, very easy, one-word answer, sex. Sex is a big, big way that the companies use to try and motivate people to buy something. If I invent a toothpaste and we put out the word that if you use my toothpaste, you'll have whiter, brighter teeth, which results in a lot better breath, which results in massive amounts of dates. And you go out and buy that toothpaste thinking, I'm going to get more dates. Well, the consumer psychologist has done his job. There are things that that the companies use to motivate you. Have you ever noticed that when you go to a grocery store and you go to the cereal aisle, the healthy cereals are up here and the Crispy Crappies are down here? Yeah, Crispy Crappies, that's going to be at the eye level of the children. And so mom goes in for Wheaties or Bran, and Junie over there, mom, Fruit Loops, you know, they've got a prize this month, Fruit Loops. Okay, I'll buy you some Fruit Loops. So now, instead of one box, she has gone out with 2 boxes. See, that's worked. Different colors affect us. Product placement, like I said. Let's say that you go into, and I use Kroger because that's my local store. Say you go into Kroger, and 3 or 4 months you've been going to Kroger's, you pretty well know the layout of the store, don't you? Let's say that I go in there today, and I said, all I need is some Rice Krispies. What's the hot chocolate doing here? Well, I do need some hot chocolate. Now, I need some Rice Krispies. Oh, while I'm at it, I need some dog food. And, oh, yeah, I'm out of laundry detergent. And let's see, what else? Oh, I need some milk. Chris needs some coffee. And as I'm running up and down those aisles, trying to find the Rice Krispies, I'm impulse buying. And where I went in for one object that would fit in a small bag, now I'm going to leave probably with 2 large bags and find out that they've rearranged the store on me. You know what? The average person can learn the layout of a store in 3-4 months. So they rearrange the store. They do that to keep you confused. And a confused consumer is a buying consumer. Well, you know, when I first started teaching this class, I looked at industrial and organizational psychology, and I said, how boring. They go into a business, and they will tell the business how to be more efficient. They work a lot with human resources, and they can come up with tests to help placement so the person will be placed in a position that is best for them. That they can enjoy the most, be the most functional and the most productive, and be the happiest. They will come up with ways to increase morale, but they'll also come up with ways to make things more efficient. And I thought, oh, good grief, how boring, you know. And then our daughter, Erin, married one. Why couldn't he have picked something good, you know? Well, get to talking to Dave. When he first married her, he was working for one of the big car companies in Detroit, making a nice salary. He was so good at his job that we call them headhunters, people that are paid to go and recruit somebody and to talk them out of working here and come to work here. Well, a headhunter went after him and convinced him to leave the one auto maker and work for a company that worked with multiple, you know, like Toyota and Honda and several of the manufacturers. He worked for them for about 5 years, maybe 7, making a nice salary. I mean, 6 figures. A nice 6-figure salary. In fact, over $500,000 a year. Then he said, I'm kind of bored, and I really think I could own my own company. So he quit and he opened up his own consultation place, and he's just tearing it up. And now all the money is basically his. He works out of his own house, or out of their house, and he flies all over the country and such. I mean, you know, it's incredible. And so I have to say that I&Os it may be boring, but I mean, that can be pretty lucrative. Sports psychology. These people are hired to motivate the athlete in a way that it'll bring out their peak performance. Now, let's just say that this is a wild example. A coach calls up a sports psychologist and says, I really want to find out what it would take to motivate my team to do the best that they can do. I want them to be the best. I want the peak performance. So he agrees to work with the team. He gets in and looks at all their files, looks at all of their school work, digs into their background, interviews each one of them, gives them tests and such. He brings the coach a stack of files like that. And he said, Coach, this is pretty cut and dried here. You can go through it and you won't have a problem. But I do have 2 guys that I want to talk to you about. This guy that you have named Joe, when you work with him during practice and during a game, you have to take an approach like a mentor, a fatherly figure, a caring friend. When you want to instruct him on how to do something, tell him that he's done something right first, and then say, you know, I wonder if we did it this way, if this would be a better result. He said, if you do that, he will play his heart out for you. But on the other hand, old Jim over here, after studying his life, after looking at his background, after really delving into the psyche of this guy. When you go to work with him, you want to correct him and tell him to do something different, you walk up to him and you grab that face mask and you bring it right into your face and you start screaming at him. And go ahead and tear him down a couple of notches and really, really degrade him, and then tell him what you want. If you use that approach on Joe, he will shut down. He will withdraw, and it won't take him long to quit. And he won't come back. On the other hand, if you use a mentor's approach with Jim over here, and you're nice to him, and you're gentle, and you coach him, you coax him, he is going to become so overconfident that he becomes lazy. And he's going to start skipping practice because he knows it all. And he's going to start skipping practice because he's everything in a bag of chips. And pretty soon, his overconfidence is going to be his worst enemy, and he won't be worth a darn to you on the field. And so, be a mentor, be an ogre, but don't get them mixed up. Well, he just told him how to motivate those two players to do the very, very best and to achieve their peak performance. Well, let's see here. Y'all believe that. I want to talk about forensic psychology. I love this stuff. Forensic psychology. Psychology that has to do with the law. Has to do with the legal system. Now there's several sub areas. I'm listing 3 and I'm going to add one. One is working in a jail. One's working in a prison, doing individual counseling, group counseling, drug counseling, coming up with ways and programs to help them so that when they're released, they won't come back. Coming up with all kinds of stuff to help those prisoners. Then you've got one that might work for an attorney. And he will work closely with the attorney, and he'll give him questions to ask a witness or questions to ask somebody on the stand, or even potential jurors. He could help them pick out jurors. Then you've got an expert witness, but then you've got the kind that everybody really thinks of when we talk about forensic psychology. Not NCIS and Abby, but criminal minds and that behavioral analysis team. Oh, how cool is that? Well, in case you haven't seen Criminal Minds, I have 2 video clips that I'm going to show you that'll really give you an idea of what criminal profiling really is. Let's see here. Whoops, wrong one.
This tired sexual tension angle.
I'm beautiful, just how you told me.
I don't know what profiling is, really.
Why do I feel I'm gonna hear no matter what I say?
It's just noticing behavior.
I'm about to hear about mine. Is that the deal?
Okay. When we first met, when your partner was sarcastic and said yes, ma'am, you instinctively reached for your detective shield, as if you were protecting it. That tells me you don't like him disrespecting the chain of command. But you're also loyal, so you didn't say something to him. I'd say you were military, probably an officer. Praise in public, censor in private, right? You're right-handed, but you have two different color pen marks on your left hand. I guess you have a toddler at home, just learning how to draw. You don't wear a ring, and you were quick to flirt with me. So you're happy to let people think you are a player. But if I took you up on it, you would run for the hills. Because you love your wife, and you would never actually cheat on her.
Well, you might just settle this case yet.
At Aspen Dental, smile for zero money down with zero worries. Plus pay zero interest and pay in full within 18 months.
So, you stated it was your profile of the killer that led you and the police to my client's door that night.
Behavioral analysis was a factor in our investigation, yes.
And was behavioral analysis also a factor in the Olympic Park bombings case in Atlanta?
Yes, it was.
And was that suspect you identified, Richard Jewell, ever convicted of the bombings?
Objection. Relevance.
Goes to the credibility of the witness and his field.
Hold on.
No, he was not convicted.
Because he was innocent. Your profile led you to the wrong man.
Jewel was not the perpetrator, but if you look at the real Olympic Park bomber, Eric Rudolph, you'll see that our profile was dead on.
Well, how about if we look at the Baton Rouge killer? Your unit said that he was white and living in the city. He was black and from the suburbs. You said that Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, was divorced and impotent. He turned out to be married with 2 kids.
Objection, Your Honor. He's giving us a room.
We have a question in there somewhere, Counselor?
Having been wrong on those cases, isn't it possible that you were wrong about Brian Matloff?
No.
Fact is, behavioral analysis is really just intellectual guesswork. You probably couldn't tell me the color of my socks with any greater accuracy than a carnival psychic.
Objection.
Withdrawn.
Charcoal gray?
Well, look at that. You got one right.
You matched them to the color of your suit to appear taller. You also wear lifts and you've had the soles of your shoes replaced. One might think you're frugal, but in fact you're having financial difficulties. You wear a fake Rolex because you pawned the real one to pay your debts. My guess is to a bookie.
I took this case pro bono. I am one of the most successful criminal attorneys in the state.
Your voice is horses. Your BlackBerry's been buzzing on the table every 20 minutes, which happens to be the average time between posts from Colonial Downs. You're getting race results. And every time you do, it affects your mood in court, and you're not having a very good day. That's because you pick horses the same way you practice law, by always taking the long shot.
You spin a very good yarn, agent, but as usual, you've proven nothing.
If I'm not mistaken, the results from the 5th race should be coming through any minute. Why don't you tell us if your luck has changed?
Your Honor, this
What
is...
do you want me to do? Either show us your BlackBerry or cut it loose, Counselor.
Nothing further.
What?
That's like roasting.
Oh, yeah. So that gives you a good flavor of what criminal profiling is. And then we have the expert witness. This is somebody who specializes and focuses on an area that the court actually believes or designates them as knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than the average person, and they will consider them an expert in that field. Well, as I told you all, I am working on my doctorate in forensic psychology. I have been interested in this for years and years and years and years. And I also told you that I am a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. And the state requires a therapist take 24 hours of continuing education to maintain their license, and that's each year, or each 2 years. Well, therefore therapists get completely inundated with brochures announcing workshops and conventions and conferences and all these things. And normally, I take them and I throw them in the garbage because they're not interested, most of it. And one day, it came. Become an expert in forensic psychology. Oh, yeah. And I thought, oh man, this is gonna be so cool. They're gonna talk about Bundy, they're gonna talk about Gacy and Dahmer, and oh man, I can't take it. I gotta fill this out right now. I've gotta get into that one. I mean, I didn't have that brochure probably 5 minutes before I already had the thing filled out, stamped, the money in there, and running down to make sure that I got it to the post office that day. Waited, and sure enough, I got my response that I had been accepted into the conference. Oh, that was good. I love when all this good stuff does. And the day came. I had been waiting with bated breath. I was the first to arrive. Got me a front row seat. Had my little pencils and papers out, just like I was a little first grader, first day of school. I was so excited. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, who's he gonna talk about first now? Bundy's one of the most famous, but I mean, there's so many, you know. And the more I thought about it, the more excited I got. Finally, the time arrived. Speaker came in. And he said, I want to thank you for coming to this conference. He said, I'm really surprised so many people are here, and I'm so proud of you. It's not everybody who sees the importance of becoming an expert witness. It's not everybody who sees the importance of delving into forensic psychology. Okay, you know, this is enough. Let's start talking about some serial killers. You know, I want to dig in on that. And he said, it's not everybody who realizes the need and the importance of expert witnesses in child custody cases. Am I in the wrong room? I mean, I want to hear about Dahmer. I mean, let's talk about Bundy. Child custody cases. And he said, there are not enough people who know how to evaluate and to do child custody cases, and to see this many people. This is really encouraging. No. Folks, I don't like to tell you when I make big mistakes. I saw the front of that brochure become an expert witness in forensic psychology. And I failed to open up the brochure and read it. And I had it with me, and I opened it up, and sure enough, it said, become an expert witness in child custody cases. Oh, man. Well, here it is. I'm going to waste my money, waste a day. Who wants to hear about this stuff? Well, at least I'll get 6 hours of CEU, so it won't be a complete waste. And he says, before we get into the lecture, I'd like to tell you how I got into this. I used to have a thriving practice in counseling, and I did good. I did very well. And I got to the age that I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, you know, I have very comfortable standard of living, but I don't want to have to work all my life. I don't want to have to work until the day I die to maintain this. What am I going to do to make my life better without having to work harder? And he said, I was looking into investments and I was looking into all kinds of things. And a friend of mine came, lawyer, and he said, I'm in a real jam. If you don't mind, would you help me with a child custody case? And he said, hey, he's a friend, no problem. And so I interviewed the father, I interviewed the mother, I interviewed the kids. And I wrote a report up and gave it to the court, and they subpoenaed me, so I had to come and testify. But several weeks later, I got a nice check. And I'm looking at that check, and I call my friend up, and I said, man, you didn't have to do this. I mean, you're my friend. And he said, no. He goes, that came through the courts. And he said, keep it, use it, enjoy it. Okay. Well, another lawyer must have been around, heard what was going on in the case, and I got another call. And I did that one, and then all of a sudden I started getting all these calls from all these lawyers to do custody cases. Pretty soon it went out of the city, well into the county, then throughout the state. I became a state go-to guy for child custody cases. Started spreading out the state. I'm now known as a national expert witness in child custody cases. So you could probably care less about that, but let me tell you something. Let me tell you about my average month. I'll get a call. There'll be a lawyer and he'll tell me about the details of the case and ask me if I'll take it. And let's say I do. They have to fly me to that city. They have to pay the flight, and I get to keep the frequent flyer miles. They have to put me in a 4- or 5-star motel or hotel. They have to pay all of my meals while I'm there. I fly in on Sunday. Monday, 8 o'clock, I meet with the first parent. First hour, just kind of an icebreaker, get to know them, make them a little bit more comfortable, help them to kind of settle down and relax. And then I give them the MMPI. Now, an MMPI is called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and it is a personality test that has over 500 questions. Last time I looked, it was over 570. Now, it takes well into 2 hours to take this test. He said, when I'm finished with that test, I'll go ahead and give them the Myers-Briggs, and I'll give them a couple others. And by that time, it's ready to break for lunch. And so we break an hour for lunch, which the company pays my lunch. Come back around 1 o'clock, and at that point, I start talking to the guy, and I find out everything about him. I want to know about the family he grew up with, how his parents got along, how his grandparents got along, when they fought, how did they fight. I want to know what his first job was like. I want to know what his job is like now. I want to know how he gets along with his co-workers. I want to know everything from grade school to graduating high school. How well did he get along with his friends? How many friends did he have? Was he or she, did they do a lot of dating? What kind of relationships did they have? I want to know about the divorce. I want to know what caused the divorce. I want to know when they started dating, what attracted them to each other. I delve into every part of their life, or his life. Wrap it up, usually around 5 o'clock, and I go, oh, I forgot to tell y'all something. I sure did. When they come in and I introduce myself and we're having a relaxing icebreaker and such, I get $500 for that hour. And when they are taking that MMPI and they are slaving over that test for 2 hours, I get $500 an hour. And I'm usually sitting there with my feet on a table, drinking coffee, working on crossword puzzles, playing on my phone, and reading the paper. But I get $500 an hour to do that. And then they get finished with all the tests, and we break for lunch, and we come back, and my interview with them is about 4 hours long. So far I've made $4,000. I go at night and I start compiling all the information. I grade the test, I score them, I interpret them. I gather all my notes about what I learned during interviews. I compile those notes, I analyze them, and I summarize them. And then I do the exact same thing the next day. That Monday I made $5,500. Tuesday I make $5,500, so that's $11,000, and then I get $500 an hour when I'm working with the kids. It usually isn't all day for them. I'm usually through by noon. So that's $2,000. So that's about $13,000 for 2.5 days work. If they bring me back to testify in person, they have to pay for my flight, my food, and my hotel. They call me to be there at 8 o'clock to testify. They don't call me at 8 or 9 or 10 or 11. They break for lunch at 12. When they come back at 1, they call me and I testify. Let's say it will go for 4 hours because it's really a contested case. Well, I've just made another $4,000 that day. So that one case, I got $17,500. If I'm really bored or don't have anything else to do, I'll take 2 cases a month. That'll be over $32,000. That'll be $34,000 a month. But I can squeak by on $17,000. I never made that kind of money when I was doing counseling. At that point, I gathered my papers and I picked up my pen again and I said, I think I'm going to listen to what this man has to say. Because obviously he knows what he's doing and there's something there to be heard. You don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to be a researcher, and you don't have to be a teacher to be a psychologist. And you can make some big bucks. This guy, $500 an hour. Dave, $500,000 a year. There's some money to be made. That's where your mind is. Well, in doing this presentation of the different professions and such, one of the things, I really don't want you to get out of this class without knowing the difference between a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a therapist. Okay? A clinical psychologist, after they finish high school, they go to college and they'll have 4 years of undergraduate school, usually graduating with a Bachelor of Arts, but they can graduate with a Bachelor of Science. A psychiatrist graduates high school, goes to undergraduate school, and usually graduates with a Bachelor of Science. And a therapist goes to college, usually gets a BA, can't get a BS, and graduates and goes on to graduate school. Okay, so they'll graduate with usually a BA. A clinical psychologist will then go to graduate school after they have graduated and gotten their bachelor's, and they will get a master's degree and then go on and take another 2 to 4 more years and get their doctorate. Now, a doctorate could be a PhD or a PsyD, but it will be either a doctor of philosophy or a doctor of psychology. Well, you've got your psychiatrist, after graduating high school, goes to college, gets a bachelor's, like I said, usually a BS, then they go to med school. Spend 4 years in medical school and get an MD. And then they spend another 2 to 4 years in a residency in psychiatry. So altogether, that's anywhere from 10 to 12 years post-high school that they spend in becoming a psychiatrist. The difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, the psychologist has either a PhD or a PsyD. The psychiatrist is a medical doctor. Now your therapist, high school, then college, and then they go and get a master's. And there's several things they can get a master's in. They can get it in psychology, they can get it in social work. There's several things, there's several areas, marriage and family therapy. But there's several things that they could get a master's in. But that's basically where the schooling would stop for the therapist. Well, because the psychologist is not a medical doctor, the psychologist cannot write scripts, not write prescriptions. The psychologist cannot do medical procedures such as electroconvulsive therapy, which is ECT, shock treatment. And so he is confined to not doing any medical procedure. Your psychiatrist, though, is a medical doctor. As a medical doctor, he has the ability to write prescription, to do medical procedures such as shock treatments, and your therapist doesn't have any medical permission to do anything like procedures or prescriptions. The clinical psychologist and your therapist use what's called the therapeutic model or the talk therapy model. When you go in to a psychologist or a therapist, they're going to say, well, what's going on? You're going to say, well, I really feel sad and blue. And they'll say, well, how long has this been going on? Well, it's been going on for at least 6 months. Well, my goodness, let's talk about it. Have you had anything really, really significant happen in your life? And, well, no. And so they will talk, and you will talk, and you will talk, and you will talk. And they keep on working with you until you will resolve what the basis of that depression was. Now, your psychiatrist, if you go into the psychiatrist and say, well, I've been feeling really blue and down, if he's really thorough, he'll order a blood panel and see if you have anything metabolic going on, like thyroid disease or diabetes, or if B12 will also cause depression. But if he doesn't do that, they approach things from a biological aspect, and so they're going to look for an organic cause. They're going to look for a physiological cause of that depression. And so let's just go ahead and say they ran a blood panel. All came back normal. Well, in that case, it's just a serotonin problem, and you need to be able to have more serotonin taken up in your brain. So we'll give you an antidepressant. They use what is called the biological model, or it's called the physiological model. It's also called the disease model, and it's also called the medical model. All of those are the same name for saying you've got to have an organic reason for the way you feel. Okay? Well, your clinical psychologist, many of them are going to do research. Many of your psychiatrists are going to do research. I used to say I never saw a therapist who had done research and then I met one. And so, it's not as frequent as your psychologist and psychiatrist, but yes, some therapists will do research. Your psychologist, when they do testing, it's going to be personality testing or neuro testing, and they will run you through tests that many times involves answering questions, drawing things, and such. Now, if a doctor says, I'm going to run you through some tests, it either could be lab tests, could be procedures like a CT, or if he wants a personality test or a neuro test, he'll write a consult and ask the psychologist to do it. The patients that a psychiatrist sees have emotional, behavioral, or mental challenges. The patients that a clinical psychologist sees have behavioral, emotional, and mental challenges. The patient that a therapist sees has behavioral, emotional, and mental challenges. And so they all see the same population. They just approach how to help them differently. And lastly, the clinical psychologist has a license. The psychiatrist has a license. And the therapist has a license, but they're all different licenses. The license for a psychiatrist gives him the license to treat patients as a medical doctor. The license for a psychologist, they're going to approach things in the talk therapy way, testing with neurological tests, personality tests and such. The therapist, they are limited. They can't, in Arkansas, therapists basically can't do testing unless they have special permission. And they do have to have a license to practice. Are there any questions? Any questions? Well, I think that we've covered enough today. Anybody have any thoughts or anything that they want to contribute? I thought that maybe while we're doing our desks, somebody might want to make a comment or an observation. Well, after this, is anybody awake?
Yeah, I'm excited about the That's actually, I was looking into criminal justice as one of the majors, and I was like thinking, I can be very analytical in my thought process, and I feel like I can be very observant.
I also teach criminal justice here.
Do you?
Anybody else got a comment? Well, let's just see here for a second.